The storm rolled in without warning, swallowing the horizon in thick sheets of rain that blurred everything into gray motion. The small roadside diner stood alone beside an empty highway, its neon sign flickering like it was struggling to stay awake. Inside, the lights were warm, but outside, the world felt distant, cold. And almost forgotten she stood just beyond the glow of the diner's porch light. Her jacket clung to her in heavy wet folds. Hair stuck to her face. Rain traced slow lines down her cheeks, but it was hard to tell whether it was rain or something else she had stopped trying to hide. Her phone had died an hour ago. The last bus she had hoped to catch never came. And now there was only the sound of rain and the hum of passing silence on the highway. She wasn't crying loudly. She wasn't dramatic. She was just still. The kind of stillness that comes when someone has already gone through too much in one day and has nothing left to give even to panic. Inside the diner, a few late travelers sat in booths, laughing softly, sipping coffee, unaware of the life standing just outside their window. A waitress wiped down the counter. A radio played something faint and old-fashioned, like it belonged to a different, easier world. And then there was him. He sat alone near the far end of the diner, partially hidden by the reflection of glass and rain. A cowboy hat rested on the booth beside him, not on his head. He wasn't flashy or loud, just quiet, observant, the kind of man who noticed things without making them uncomfortable. He had seen her arrive. Not suddenly, no, he had watched her approach slowly from down the road, dragging uncertainty with every step. At first, he assumed she was waiting for someone, but as time passed, he realized she wasn't waiting anymore. She was stuck, still. He didn't move right away. He simply watched the way she stood outside the diner, like she was trying to decide whether she deserved to go in. Something about her hesitation felt familiar to him in a way he didn't fully explain even to himself. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, pushing rain harder against the glass. She pulled her arms tighter around herself, but it didn't help much. Her shoes were soaked. Her breath came out uneven, not from fear exactly, but from exhaustion. Emotional exhaustion. The kind that settles in your bones. She looked toward the diner door once, then away again. As if stepping inside required permission she didn't have. Inside, the cowboy finally moved, slowly, no urgency. He paid his bill, left a quiet nod to the waitress, and walked toward the exit. The bell above the door rang softly as he stepped out into the storm. The cold hit him instantly, but he didn't react. He adjusted his stance slightly, letting his eyes settle on her, not in judgment, not in curiosity that pried too hard. Just recognition. Like he understood that she wasn't lost in distance. She was lost in something deeper. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Only the rain did. She noticed him then, finally. Her eyes lifted, cautious, tired. There was a flicker of concern in her expression, like she expected the worst from a stranger appearing in the middle of a storm. Her voice barely carried over the rain when she finally whispered, almost to herself, "I don't even know you." It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't fear. It was resignation. Like she was reminding herself that connection wasn't something she could afford anymore. The cowboy didn't react the way she expected. No surprise, no offense, no step closer. Instead, he simply stood a few feet away, hands relaxed at his sides, and let the rain fall between them like a curtain that didn't matter. Then, in a voice calm enough to cut through the storm without raising itself above it, he replied, "You don't have to." That was it. No explanation, no demand, no pressure to understand him or trust him or even look at him longer than she wanted to. Just those 3 words, and somehow they landed heavier than anything she had heard all day. Because in that moment, standing outside a lonely diner with rain soaking everything she had left, She expected questions. Instead, she was given permission. Permission not to know. Permission not to decide. Permission, maybe, just to exist without being judged for it. And for the first time that night, she didn't step back. She simply stood there, wondering why a stranger in the rain had just made the world feel a little less sharp. The rain didn't slow down. It deepened, like the sky had decided to empty itself completely over the lonely stretch of highway. The diner's warm light still spilled onto the wet pavement, but it felt smaller now, as if the storm was slowly shrinking the world around them into something tight and personal. She was still standing outside, not moving forward, not stepping back, just caught between both. The cowboy's words, "You don't have to," still lingered in her mind like a sound that refused to fade. She kept replaying it, trying to figure out where the catch was. Life had taught her that kindness usually came with conditions. Help usually came with expectations. Silence usually meant judgment waiting to happen. But he hadn't given her any of that. He simply stood there, in the rain, as if her presence wasn't a problem to solve. That unsettled her more than anything else. She shifted slightly, hugging herself tighter. Her fingers were numb, not just from cold, but from the strange emotional weight pressing down on her chest. Every instinct told her to leave, to turn away, to keep walking down the highway even if she had nowhere to go. But her body didn't obey that instinct, because exhaustion had taken over where fear used to be. The cowboy finally moved again, but only slightly. He stepped closer to the edge of the porch, not invading her space, just closing the distance enough so his voice wouldn't have to fight the storm. "I'm not here to ask you anything," he said gently. That sentence made her blink. Not here to ask anything. That was new. Most people asked immediately, "Where are you going? What happened? Do you need help? Are you okay?" Even strangers on the street demanded answers in exchange for attention. But he didn't. He just existed there, steady and unbothered by her silence. She looked at him properly for the first time. He didn't look threatening. He didn't look overly kind either. He looked real. Weathered boots, damp jacket, hands that stayed still instead of reaching too fast. His face carried the kind of calm that didn't come from pretending life was easy. It came from surviving when it wasn't. Still, trust didn't come easily. Her voice came out again, quieter this time, almost breaking into the sound of rain. "I don't even know you." She almost regretted saying it the moment it left her lips, because it sounded less like a warning, and more like loneliness speaking for her. The cowboy nodded slightly, like he understood something deeper inside that sentence than what was actually said. Then he replied again, just as calmly as before, "You don't have to know me." A pause. The rain filled it. A truck passed far in the distance, headlights cutting briefly through the storm like a memory and then disappearing again. She frowned slightly, confused now more than guarded. "Then why are you talking to me?" It wasn't angry. It wasn't sharp. It was tired curiosity. The kind that comes from someone who has stopped expecting good answers. The cowboy glanced toward the diner door for a moment, then back to her. "Because you looked like someone standing in a storm without a reason to keep standing." That was all he said. No dramatic tone. No attempt to impress. Just a simple observation delivered without pressure. Something inside her tightened, because he was right. She didn't even fully know why she was still standing there. Her bus was gone. Her plans had fallen apart hours ago. The night had nothing left to offer her except cold and uncertainty. And yet, she hadn't moved, as if part of her was waiting for permission to stop being invisible. The cowboy didn't move closer again. He didn't try to lead her anywhere. Instead, he tilted his head slightly toward the diner, where warmth and light still waited behind glass. "They'll open the door again in a bit," he said softly. You can go inside if you want. Or not. Either way, you're not in anyone's way out here. That line landed differently. You're not in anyone's way. She hadn't realized how much she had been carrying that feeling like simply existing was something she needed to justify. Her grip on herself loosened slightly. Not because she trusted him fully, but because, for the first time in a long time, someone wasn't trying to pull something from her pain. They were just standing beside it. And in the middle of the storm, that felt like the smallest kind of safety. But also the most unfamiliar. The rain kept falling, steady and unhurried, as if time itself had slowed down around the diner. The glow from inside spilled onto the wet pavement, creating a soft golden reflection that shimmered with every drop. But between the woman and the cowboy, there was a strange stillness, like the storm couldn't fully reach that small pocket of silence. She stood there, arms still wrapped tightly around herself, trying to understand what was happening. Nothing about this made sense to her. Strangers didn't behave like this. Strangers didn't step into storms without wanting something in return. They didn't offer space without questions. They didn't stand so calmly in front of someone clearly falling apart and act like it was normal. And yet, he did. The cowboy didn't rush her, didn't scan her face for answers, didn't look impatient or uncomfortable with her silence. He simply stood a few feet away, grounded, like the rain had no authority over him. That calmness disturbed her more than any urgency would have, because urgency she understood. Pressure she understood. Demand she understood. But peace, from a stranger in the middle of her worst night, that felt unfamiliar in a way that made her uneasy. She shifted slightly, trying to steady her breathing. Her mind kept searching for the hidden angle. There had to be one. People didn't just appear like this without reason. Maybe he was waiting for something. Maybe he was trying to lure her into trusting him so she would owe him later. Maybe this was just another situation disguised as kindness. She had learned to think like that. Life had trained her to. The cowboy noticed none of her internal conflict, or maybe he did and simply chose not to react to it. Instead, he leaned slightly against the wooden post of the porch, his posture relaxed but steady, like someone who had learned how to stay calm even when everything around him wasn't. "You're thinking too hard," he said gently. The words weren't a judgment. They were almost understanding. Her eyes lifted sharply. "Excuse me?" A small pause passed between them, filled only by the sound of rain hitting metal and pavement. He didn't change his tone when he answered. "You look like you're trying to figure out what I want from you." Her throat tightened slightly, because he was right again. But she didn't want to admit it. "I don't know what you mean," she said quickly, though her voice lacked strength. The cowboy nodded slowly as if he'd expected that answer. "That's okay," he replied. "You don't have to figure me out." That sentence again. You don't have to. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it carried a weight that kept pressing against the walls she had built around herself. She looked away for a moment, watching the rain hit the ground in uneven patterns. Her reflection flickered in a shallow puddle, uncertain, tired, barely recognizable. Inside the diner, someone laughed softly. The sound felt far away, like it belonged to another life entirely. She swallowed hard. Most people, they ask questions, she said quietly, almost to herself. The cowboy glanced toward the diner lights, then back to her. "I know," he said. Just that. No explanation of why he was different. No story about himself yet. No attempt to prove anything. Just acknowledgement. That was the second thing that unsettled her. He wasn't trying to convince her of his kindness. He was simply behaving like it didn't need convincing. A gust of wind moved through the empty lot, pushing rain sideways for a moment. She flinched slightly, pulling her hood tighter. The cowboy noticed but still didn't rush to fix it. Instead, he said something unexpected. "You're safe here." She froze, not because she believed it, but because she couldn't remember the last time someone had said that to her without expecting her to earn it first. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Safe. The word felt foreign, heavy, almost unbelievable. She finally looked at him directly, searching his face again, trying to find any sign that this was an act, a trick, a performance. But there was nothing theatrical about him, no urgency, no persuasion, just calm, deep, steady calm. And that made it harder to dismiss him, because liars usually rushed. And he wasn't rushing at all. For the first time that night, she felt something crack, not loudly, not dramatically, but subtly, like a tight knot inside her chest loosening just a fraction. She didn't trust him yet. Not even close. But she also couldn't ignore the strange fact that standing near him felt less like danger, and more like breathing room she didn't realize she was missing. And in that quiet space between fear and confusion, she stayed. The rain finally began to soften, not stopping, but losing its earlier aggression. It shifted from heavy sheets into a steadier, quieter fall, as if the storm itself was running out of energy. The diner's neon sign flickered more clearly now, and the warm light spilling through the windows felt slightly brighter against the dim, washed-out sky. She was still outside. But something had changed. Not in the world around her, but in the way she was standing in it. Her shoulders weren't as tightly locked. Her breathing, though still uneven, had slowed a little. The constant tension in her body hadn't disappeared, but it had loosened just enough to notice. The cowboy remained where he was, not closing the distance, not increasing pressure. He simply watched the road for a moment, then glanced back at her with the same calm presence he had carried since the beginning. "You don't have to stay out here if you don't want to," he said gently. "No command, no expectation, just an option." That was what made it different. She looked toward the diner door again. Through the glass she could see movement now. The waitress restocking cups, a couple finishing their coffee, warmth and light existing in a world she felt distant from. For a moment, she imagined stepping inside. Dry clothes, warm air. A chair that didn't feel like it might disappear under her, but then doubt crept in again. She hesitated. "What if I don't belong in there?" she asked quietly, almost embarrassed to admit it. The words slipped out before she could stop them. The cowboy didn't react with surprise. He simply tilted his head slightly, like he understood the feeling too well to question it. "Belonging isn't something you get permission for," he said. That line hung in the air between them. She frowned faintly. "It feels like it is." He nodded once, slowly. "I know," he replied, "but it's not." A pause. The rain tapped gently against the roof above them, steady and rhythmic. She shifted her weight again, uncertain. Her arms were still wrapped around herself, but less like protection now and more like habit. The cowboy stepped slightly closer to the diner door, not toward her, but toward the entrance itself. He didn't reach for her. He didn't gesture insistently. He simply stood in a position where she could see the door more clearly if she wanted to. "There's warm coffee inside," he said, "and a seat that doesn't care who you are." A small pause followed. "And nobody in there is looking for your story." That last part hit differently, because she realized how much she had been bracing for exactly that: questions, explanations, judgment disguised as curiosity. She looked down at her soaked shoes. The water had seeped through completely now. Her toes were numb. Her body felt tired in a way sleep alone couldn't fix. Still, she didn't move. Not yet. The cowboy didn't push. Instead, he added quietly, "You can sit for 5 minutes, that's all. And if you want to leave after that, you can. 5 minutes, Not forever. Not commitment. Not a decision that would change everything. Just 5 minutes. Her eyes flickered toward him again. You really don't know me, she said softly, as if reminding both of them. A faint, almost invisible smile touched his expression, not amused, but understanding. That's true, he said, but I don't need to. Something about that answer unsettled her again, but not in a bad way this time. It wasn't suspicion. It was confusion mixed with something quieter, something that felt dangerously close to relief. She exhaled slowly. For the first time, she realized she wasn't being pulled anywhere. No one was grabbing her attention. No one was demanding her story. No one was forcing her to decide anything faster than she could handle. And yet, she was still being offered kindness, without cost attached. The diner door creaked slightly as someone inside pushed it open for a moment, letting out a wave of warm air and the smell of coffee. It drifted into the cold night like an invitation that didn't speak. She flinched slightly at the warmth hitting her skin. The cowboy noticed. But again, he didn't interpret it for her. He didn't rush to comfort her reaction. He just said, "It's your choice." Those 3 words landed differently than before. Not because they were new, but because she was beginning to believe them. Her fingers loosened slightly from her sleeves, and for the first time since the night began, she didn't feel like she was standing outside the world. She felt like she was standing at the edge of deciding whether to step back into it. The diner door swung open again, letting out a stronger wave of warmth this time. It brushed against her skin like something she hadn't felt in hours, maybe longer. The smell of coffee, fried food, and clean wood mixed together in a way that felt oddly comforting, like a memory she couldn't fully place. She hesitated at the edge of the porch, still outside, still unsure, still caught between leaving everything as it was or stepping into something unfamiliar. The cowboy stood a few steps away now, not blocking her path, not guiding her forward. Just existing in the same space, steady and patient, like time didn't bother him the way it bothered her. You don't have to decide right now, he said softly. That sentence almost made her laugh, but not because it was funny, because it was rare. No one in her life had ever made not deciding feel like an option. Everything had always been urgent. Everything had always required a reaction, an answer, a choice made under pressure. But this moment didn't. This moment just waited. She swallowed hard, looking down at her soaked hands. Her fingers trembled slightly, though she wasn't sure if it was from cold or exhaustion or something deeper she didn't want to name. I don't understand why you're being like this, she admitted quietly. Her voice sounded smaller than she expected. The cowboy tilted his head slightly. Like what? Calm, she said. Like none of this is strange to you. A pause. The rain softened again, tapping gently on the roof like distant footsteps. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced toward the diner lights, then back at her like he was choosing. Words carefully not to impress her, but to avoid overwhelming her. Life gets strange, he said finally. But kindness doesn't have to be. That sentence landed deep. She frowned slightly, as if trying to push it away. People don't just help strangers like this. He nodded once. Some don't. That honesty surprised her more than anything else. There was no argument, no persuasion, no attempt to convince her that the world was better than it had shown her. Just truth. Simple and unpolished. Inside the diner, she noticed a couple at a booth laughing softly over something on a phone. A waitress refilled a cup of coffee with practiced ease. Everything looked normal, ordinary, safe in a way that didn't feel staged. Her stomach tightened. Slightly. Not hunger exactly. Something closer to realization. She hadn't eaten properly all day. The thought came suddenly, like her body reminding her of something she had ignored while her mind was busy surviving. The cowboy noticed the shift in her posture, subtle as it was. "You hungry?" he asked gently. She hesitated. That question should have felt invasive. It should have made her defensive. But it didn't, because he didn't ask it like a test. He asked it like it was just a fact of being human. Still, she shook her head slightly out of habit. "I'm fine." A pause. He didn't challenge her. He simply said, "Okay." And that "okay" didn't sound like disbelief. It sounded like acceptance. That alone made her guard shift again. She looked at him more closely now, not just as a stranger in a storm, but as a person. His presence wasn't loud. It didn't demand attention, but it didn't fade either. It stayed steady, like something anchored in place. "I keep waiting for the part where you ask me something," she said quietly. The cowboy gave a small, almost thoughtful nod. "You're used to that," he said. It wasn't a question. It was recognition. Her throat tightened slightly. Because he was right again. Most people didn't offer space without taking something in return. Every conversation she could remember had been shaped by expectation questions, explanations, proof of worth, proof of pain, proof of reason. But this one wasn't. This one was just open. And that openness was starting to crack something inside her she had kept sealed for a long time. She looked down again, then slowly back toward the diner door. The warmth still waited there, unpressured, unclaimed. Her breathing shifted slightly less tight, more uneven in a different way now. Not panic, not fear. Something closer to uncertainty loosening into possibility. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do," she admitted, softly. The cowboy didn't hesitate. "You're not supposed to do anything," he said. "Just decide what helps you stand a little easier right now." That was all. No grand solution, no life-changing demand. Just a small, grounded idea. What helps you stand a little easier? And for the first time that night, she realized she had been standing so long in discomfort that she had stopped questioning whether she had to. Her eyes drifted toward the open door again, then back to him. And something in her expression softened, not fully trusting, not fully safe, but no longer completely closed. Her guard didn't fall, but it shifted, just enough to let a crack of light in. She didn't realize when she stepped forward, it wasn't a dramatic movement. There was no sudden decision, no clear moment of courage. It was quieter than that, so subtle it almost felt like her body made. The choice before her mind agreed. One step, then another. The porch creaked softly beneath her weight as she moved. Closer to the diner door. Warm air slipped out again, brushing against her face, and this time she didn't flinch away from it. She just paused there, halfway between outside and inside, as if standing in the doorway itself required permission. She was still unsure she had. The cowboy didn't follow her. He didn't guide her. He didn't even step closer. He simply stayed where he was, letting her have the space to decide without feeling watched. That silence between them, strangely enough, felt different now. Earlier, silence had felt heavy, suspicious, like something waiting to break. But now it felt steady, almost safe. Inside the diner, the sounds were ordinary. A spoon clinking against a mug. A chair scraping softly across the floor. A low conversation near the counter. Nothing about it was important to anyone else, but to her, it felt like stepping into a world that hadn't been harshened by whatever she had been carrying outside. She stayed near the doorway. Not fully inside, not fully out. The cowboy finally spoke. But his voice was even quieter now, as if he understood that anything louder might disturb the fragile space forming around her. "You don't have to rush," he said. She nodded faintly, though she didn't turn to look at him yet. "I feel like I should say something." she admitted. Her voice sounded uncertain, almost embarrassed. Like what? He asked gently. She hesitated. That was the problem. She didn't know. Normally, she would have known exactly what was expected: gratitude, explanation, polite refusal, guarded acceptance. There were always scripts for situations like this. Social rules, emotional exchanges, clear roles, but this didn't fit any of them. So instead of answering, she just stood there. And for the first time in a long time, no one filled the silence for her. The cowboy didn't interrupt. He didn't offer suggestions. He didn't try to steer the moment. He simply let the silence exist. And something strange began to happen inside that silence. Her breathing started to slow. Not because someone told her to calm down, but because no one was pushing her to do anything else. Her shoulders dropped slightly, not fully relaxed, but less rigid than before. It was subtle, but noticeable. Like her body was remembering what it felt like not to be braced for impact. Inside the diner, a couple laughed again softly. The sound didn't feel far away anymore. It felt reachable. She looked down at her hands. Still damp, still trembling slightly, but not as tightly clenched. The cowboy spoke again, carefully, not breaking the quiet, but shaping it gently. Sometimes, he said, you don't need answers right away. You just need a place where you're not expected to have them. That sentence stayed in the air longer than the others because it didn't ask her to believe anything. It didn't demand agreement. It simply described something she had never been offered before. A place without expectations. She finally turned her head slightly, just enough to see him from the corner of her eye. You talk like you've done this before, she said quietly. A faint pause. Then he nodded. Not this exact moment, he replied, but enough moments like it. That honesty again. No mystery, no performance. Just lived experience, offered without forcing her to understand it. She looked away again, toward the inside of the diner. A waitress glanced briefly in her direction, then continued working without reaction. No judgment, no curiosity that felt invasive, just life continuing normally. That normality should have felt unimportant, but instead, it felt grounding. Like the world hadn't stopped just because hers had tilted. She took another slow breath. And this time, it didn't feel like she was holding it together. It felt like she was letting something go. The cowboy remained silent again, giving her space to sit in whatever she was feeling without naming it. And in that silence, something she didn't expect happened. The noise inside her head began to soften, not disappear, but quiet down enough that she could finally hear something else. Her own thoughts. Not panic. Not survival instinct. Just her. And in that rare quiet, she realized something she hadn't been able to notice before. She wasn't being pulled. She wasn't being chased. She wasn't being judged. She was simply being allowed to exist. And that alone somehow was enough to make the world feel less sharp than it had been all night. The diner felt warmer now, not just in temperature, but in presence, like the space itself had slowly accepted her arrival without asking for anything in return. She had finally stepped inside, though not fully settled. She chose a seat near the window, where she could still see the rain sliding down the glass like fading memories of the storm outside. The cowboy followed her in only after she had already sat down, not beside her, not too close. Just near enough to remain present, but far enough to keep the space hers. A waitress approached almost immediately, her expression neutral and kind, in the way of people who have seen many long nights come and go. "Coffee?" she asked gently. The woman hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Yes, please." Her voice sounded different inside the diner, less fragile, more real. When the waitress walked away, silence settled between them again, but it no longer felt heavy. It felt natural, like the world had finally stopped rushing her. The cowboy took off his hat and placed it on the table beside him. That small gesture made him feel less like a symbol and more like a person. She noticed it. And somehow, that made him feel even more real. For a while, neither of them spoke. She watched the rain outside the window. The storm was still there. But from inside, it looked distant now, like something happening to another version of herself who had not yet stepped in from the cold. Eventually, she broke the silence. "You're not like other people," she said quietly. He didn't respond immediately. He just looked at her, not studying her, not evaluating, just listening. Then he said, "I've been told that before." A faint pause followed. She stirred slightly in her seat. "That doesn't really answer my question." A small, almost invisible smile touched his expression, but it wasn't defensive or amused. It was understanding. "Fair enough," he said. The waitress returned with the coffee and placed it gently in front of her. The warmth wrapped around her fingers as she held the cup. She didn't drink immediately, just held it like it might anchor her. When the waitress left, the cowboy finally leaned back slightly. "I wasn't always like this," he said after a moment. That caught her attention. She looked up. He continued, voice steady but quieter now, as if speaking from a place not often visited. "I used to ask a lot of questions. I used to think helping people meant fixing things quickly, giving answers, finding solutions." She listened without interrupting. "But I learned something," he added. He glanced briefly toward the window, where rain still traced slow paths down the glass. "Most people don't need fixing. They just need space to stop bracing for impact." That sentence landed differently. He wasn't speaking like someone trying to impress her. He was speaking like someone who had once been where she was now and had stayed long enough to understand it. She looked down at her coffee again. "Something happened to you?" she asked carefully. A pause, not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. The cowboy nodded slowly. "Life," he said simply, "like it does to everyone eventually." There was no drama in his tone, no tragic storytelling, just quiet acceptance of experience. She studied him a little more now. He didn't look broken. He didn't look hardened in the way she expected someone with pain to look. Instead, he looked settled, as if he had made peace with things she was still trying to survive. That realization confused her more than anything else. "How do you stay so calm?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he folded his hands loosely on the table. "I stopped expecting people to be okay immediately," he said, "including myself." A pause. "And I stopped believing that silence means something is wrong." She exhaled slowly, that sentence echoing in her mind, because silence had always meant danger to her, or judgment, or abandonment. But here, in this small diner, with rain still falling outside, silence didn't feel like any of those things. It felt like room. Room to breathe, room to exist, room to not have everything figured out at once. She finally took a sip of the coffee. Warm, bittersweet, real. The cowboy watched her, not intensely, not intrusively, but with a kind of calm attention that didn't demand performance from her. After a moment, she spoke again. "You didn't have to stay out there in the rain with me." He shrugged slightly. "Maybe not." A pause. "But I think sometimes people just need someone to stay long enough for the world to feel less heavy." Her grip on the cup tightened slightly, not from fear, but from something softer. Understanding, slowly forming. She looked at him again. And for the first time, she wasn't trying to figure out what he wanted. She was trying to understand what she was feeling. And that was new. The night slowly gave way to something softer. Outside the diner window, the storm had finally thinned into a light drizzle. The sharp edges of the world were gone now, replaced by a quiet gray-blue dawn. Creeping along the horizon, streetlights still glowed faintly, but they no longer felt like protection from darkness, just reminders that night had almost finished its shift. Inside, the diner was quieter too, fewer voices, slower movement. The early hour stillness of a place that had carried people through the night and was now gently releasing them into morning. She sat by the window, both hands wrapped around the warm coffee cup. She hadn't realized how long she had been there until she noticed the light outside changing. Time had passed without pressure, without urgency, without anyone asking her to explain it. That alone felt unreal. Across from her, the cowboy remained, steady as ever. Same calm presence, that same quiet patience, but now something had shifted, not in him, but in the space between them. It no longer felt like two strangers caught in a storm. It felt like two people who had shared something unspoken and survived it without breaking it. She finally broke the silence. Didn't think I'd still be here, she admitted softly. The cowboy looked at her, not surprised, not alarmed, just listening. Here as in the diner? He asked. She shook her head slightly. Here as in? Still okay enough to sit down and breathe. A small pause followed. Then he nodded. That's a good kind of still here, he said. Her fingers tightened slightly around the cup again. For a moment, she didn't respond because she realized something strange. She wasn't just physically rested. She felt less lost, not found, not fixed. Just less lost than she had been when the night began. Outside, a faint line of sunlight began to touch the wet pavement. It made everything shimmer in a quiet, almost gentle way. She watched it for a moment, then spoke. Again. I kept thinking you were going to ask me something, she said. The cowboy gave a faint, knowing nod. I know. She frowned slightly. Why didn't you? He leaned back a little, as if considering the simplest way to explain something he had learned the hard way. Because answers don't always come from questions, he said. Sometimes they come from being somewhere long enough that you stop, feeling like you have to defend yourself. That made her quiet again. She looked down at her coffee. Defend herself. She hadn't realized how much of her life had been spent doing exactly that. Even in calm moments, even in safe places, she had always been bracing for something: judgment, disappointment, rejection, consequences. But here, there had been none of that. Just space. Slowly, she lifted her gaze toward him again. I don't even know your name, she said quietly. A faint pause. Then he answered. Does it matter right now? The question wasn't dismissive. It was gentle. She thought about it honestly. And realized it didn't. Not in this moment. Not in this strange, quiet morning where she felt like she was returning to herself piece by piece. She gave a small, almost uncertain shake of her head. No, she admitted. Nodded once. Then don't worry about it. Outside, the sky brightened further. The rain was almost gone now. Just scattered drops left on glass and pavement, catching early light like tiny reflections of the night that had passed. She set the cup down slowly. Her hands didn't shake anymore. That realization surprised her more than anything else. She looked at the cowboy one last time, not searching for answers now, but simply acknowledging him. You helped me, she said quietly. He didn't accept it like a hero. He didn't deny it either. He just said, you did most of it yourself. I just didn't interrupt. That answer stayed with her because it felt honest. And simple. And real. A few minutes later, she stood up from the booth. The movement felt different than when she had arrived the night before. Less heavy, less uncertain. Still careful, but no longer afraid of the act of moving forward. She hesitated once near the door, then turned back. For a brief moment, their eyes met again. No dramatic goodbye. No emotional collapse. Just understanding. Gave a small nod. And he returned it. No words needed. Outside, the morning air was cool but no longer harsh. The world didn't feel like it had changed overnight, but she had. As she stepped away from the diner, She didn't feel like she was escaping anything anymore. She felt like she was continuing and behind her. In the quiet glow of the fading night and rising morning, the cowboy remained just a calm presence in a world that had finally stopped feeling like a storm.